The war hadn't even begun, and already the North was soaked in blood. When the letter came from Catelyn, carried by a trusted bannerman, it hit Ned like a cold hammer to the chest. She had captured Jaime Lannister, the Kingslayer, the Lion, who had crippled their boy, who had mocked justice, who had dared to attack Ned in the streets of King's Landing like a common thug. Now he was in her grasp, chained and broken, locked inside a dark cell beneath Riverrun. Ned rode to meet her. He knew what Catelyn wanted before she even spoke it. He saw it in her eyes. Not just rage, but something colder, more final. She wanted blood for Bran, for the lies, for all the pain the Lannisters had brought upon them. And she wasn't wrong. When he entered the hall, their eyes locked like old foes rather than husband and wife. "You want him dead," Ned said plainly. "I want justice," she replied. "For our son, for everything they've done to us." "But if we kill him, Catelyn," Ned said, his voice trembling with the weight of consequence, "what happens when Tywin hears?" She walked forward, calm but fierce. "Tywin Lannister has already declared war by sending assassins after our child. We owe him no mercy." The decision clawed at Ned's insides. It went against everything he stood for. Honor, law, balance. Jaime was a prisoner, and prisoners weren't supposed to be butchered like pigs. But then again, what mercy did the Lannisters ever show? Later that night, Ned stood alone under the torchlight, staring at the Raven inked with the news from King's Landing. Robert was dead. Joffrey sat the throne, a bastard boy claiming the crown. Lies built on lies. The choice burned him alive inside. But when morning came, he gave the nod, not in words, just a look to Catelyn. Her eyes glistened with tears not of sorrow, but triumph. The Kingslayer would die. By noon, Jaime Lannister was dragged from his cell, filthy, bruised, and still smirking like a man too proud to beg. "You think this changes anything?" he spat. "My father will burn the Riverlands to ash." Catelyn stood tall. "So be it." The sword came down swift. Ista, great Valyrian steel blade of House Stark, sang, as it parted flesh from bone. The Kingslayer's head rolled across the stones, his golden hair stained with mud and blood. There was no cheering, no applause, only silence, thick and heavy. That night, Ned couldn't sleep. He sat by the fire, gripping the hilt of ice, haunted by the look Jaime had given him just before the blade fell. Not fear, but something colder. A warning dot, and in the dark corners of the Riverlands, the Lannister gold began to move. Wrath had been set loose, and it would be merciless. The news travelled faster than ravens. Tywin Lannister received word of Jaime's death before the blood had even dried on the Riverrun stones. The Maester trembled as he handed the scroll to Tywin. The old lion read it in silence, his cold, pale eyes betraying no emotion. Then he stood calm and deliberate and gave a single order: "Gather the army, burn them all." Back in Riverrun, tension coiled like a snake ready to strike. Catelyn tried to stand firm, but even she felt the shift in the air. The death of Jaime had not brought peace. It brought a silence so thick it choked the halls of her childhood home. Ned hadn't spoken much since the execution. He watched their sons with a quiet worry, especially Robb, who now bore the gaze of a man who knew war was coming. When Robb asked his father if they had done the right thing, Ned hesitated. "We did what felt just," he said at last, "but justice without mercy invites revenge." Ravens came in flocks. Lords swore fealty to Robb. The North prepared for war, but it wasn't just Tywin who stirred. In King's Landing, Cersei Lannister collapsed in her chambers upon hearing her twin was dead. Her screams were heard across the Red Keep. Joffrey, now crowned king, declared the North traitors and demanded Ned Stark's head. But Ned was no longer the Hand. He had fled the capital with the knowledge of Joffrey's illegitimacy. That truth still burned in his hands like wildfire. But now, no one would care about the truth. Only vengeance mattered. Arya and Sansa were still in King's Landing. Hostages now. Ned's chest felt like it was being crushed every moment he thought of them. The Riverlands bled first. Tywin's forces swept through the land like a red wave. Villages were razed, innocents butchered, and no one was spared. The Lannister banners, crimson and gold, became symbols of dread. And when a small northern village loyal to the Tullys was burned to ash, a message was nailed to a tree for Jaime. Robb rode out with the northern banners, his face set, his sword sharp. He was not the boy who played with wooden swords in Winterfell anymore. He was the young wolf now, and war had made him colder. Ned remained behind in Riverrun with Catelyn. They received wounded men daily, men with limbs gone, eyes missing, children screaming for mothers buried beneath rubble. It was not a war anymore. It was a massacre, and yet Catelyn never flinched. She stood by her decision, though Ned could see the ghosts growing in her eyes. One night, as screams echoed from the maester's chambers, where a burned child was being treated, Ned finally spoke. Was it worth it? Catelyn didn't look at him. Ask me again when Tywin is dead. But even she knew Tywin Lannister wasn't just a man. He was a storm. And storms didn't die easy. The war escalated beyond what anyone could have imagined. Every mile between the twins and King's Landing turned into a graveyard. Tywin Lannister moved like a butcher with a crown, tearing through the Riverlands, not just to punish, but to make a statement. This is what happens when you touch a lion. Robb Stark, despite his youth, fought back with fire in his veins. He led the Northern Army with a fury that surprised even his own bannermen. His victory at the Battle of the Whispering Wood was swift and brutal. He didn't take prisoners. When he captured a Lannister commander, he sent the man's body back in pieces in answer to the atrocities Tywin's men had left in their wake. But victories didn't come without cost. The North was stretched thin. Supplies ran low. Morale flickered like a dying candle. Worse, whispers grew louder among the men that executing Jaime had cursed them. That vengeance had opened the gates of hell. In Riverrun, Catelyn watched the map with growing dread. Every red marker she placed was a town burned, a village gone, a family butchered. Ned stood beside her, older than ever, his eyes hollowed by the burden of command and consequence. And then came the worst news. Yet Sansa was to be wed to King Joffrey. The raven that carried the message came sealed with gold wax and the Lannister lion. Cersei's revenge would be drawn in ink and blood both. And Arya, no one had seen her since Ned fled the capital. For all they knew, she was already dead. Hand trembled as she read the letter. They're using our daughters as shields, she whispered. No, Ned said, taking the letter from her. They're using them as bait. He knew what this was. Tywin didn't just want war. He wanted annihilation. He wanted to destroy House Stark from the inside, tear it down so completely that no one would dare cross the Lannisters again, and the execution of Jaime had given him the perfect excuse. Later that night, Ned stood at the Godswood of Riverrun, staring into the black water. He prayed to the old gods, not for victory, but for a sign, something, anything that could guide them. Robb returned the next day, his armor still stained with blood, his wolf-grey wind snarling beside him. He looked his father in the eye and said, "If we don't move south now, we'll lose everything." "But we risk Sansa," Ned said quietly. "We already lost Arya," Robb replied. "How many more do we sacrifice before we end this?" Ned didn't answer. He couldn't. His heart was torn between honor and vengeance, between the love for his daughters and the duty to his people. But the war gave no room for hesitation. Catelyn met him later that night. "We may have lit this fire, Ned," she said, "but the Lannisters poured the oil." He nodded slowly. "Then we burned together." The march south was grim. Every step toward King's Landing felt like walking into a grave. Robb led the northern host with steely resolve, but behind his eyes, Ned could see the weight pressing down. He was too young to carry it, but he carried it all the same. And the army followed, tired but loyal, their hearts filled with loss and fury. They stopped at Harrenhal, hoping to find allies or shelter, but what they found instead was horror. The castle was a ruin, more cursed than strong. Inside, Tywin's men had left a trail of corpses and rot prisoners flayed, women violated, children broken. It was not just war anymore. It was madness. One of the surviving small folk whispered they did it for the Kingslayer, said it was justice. Ned gritted his teeth. Every time someone mentioned Jaime's name, it felt like a wound reopening. He began to understand. Killing Jaime had not ended their suffering. It had cursed them, turned justice into a ghost that followed them everywhere, whispering vengeance in every ear. Robb wanted to move on quickly. He was becoming more like a general than a son, distant, sharp, unforgiving. "We cannot stop," he said. "Every moment we wait, Joffrey strengthens. The city must fall." But Ned was not ready. Not yet. He sent ravens ahead to Stannis, to Renly, to Dorne, pleading for alliances. Most ignored him. Some, like Renly, mocked him and Stannis. His raven returned, torn to shreds. No reply at all. The kingdom was fractured, and no one would stand behind a northern war sparked by an execution. That night, Catelyn met Ned by the fire. She didn't sleep any more. Neither did he. "I can still see his face," she said. "Jaime's, just." Before the sword fell, Ned looked into the flames. He knew what would come. Maybe that's why he smiled. She didn't answer. They both sat in silence, haunted by a dead man who had somehow become more powerful in death than he ever was in life. The next morning, word came that Tywin had bypassed the Riverlands and was marching straight toward King's Landing. Not to defend it, but to sack it himself. Cersei had fled the capital with Tommen and Myrcella, leaving Joffrey alone with the Red Keep guards and a paranoid madness growing by the day. "He's abandoned the capital?" Robb asked, confused. "No," Ned said quietly. "He's making it a trap. It was a brilliant move. Let the North march into a city that hated them, then slam the doors shut and burn them alive inside." Tywin didn't want a battle. He wanted a massacre to match the one they gave Jaime. Robb wanted to press on anyway. He was growing colder with each passing day. Let them come, let them try. But Ned wasn't so sure anymore. His dreams were filled with burning towers, with Arya screaming, with Sansa in chains. Everything they had tried to protect was unraveling, and in the distance, the wildfire was already being prepared beneath the city. The north reached the walls of King's Landing under a sky heavy with smoke. The city looked like a dying beast, its gates shut tight, its towers lined with archers, and behind it all, the faint, sickly green glow of wildfire. Tywin had turned the capital into a trap, and the bait was power, vengeance, and blood. Ned stood beside Robb atop a ridge, watching the city with wary eyes. The banners of House Stark and House Tully flew high, but there was no joy in their hearts. They had not come as liberators. They had come to finish what Jaime's death had begun. Inside the Red Keep, Joffrey ruled like a tyrant possessed. He had ordered hundreds of innocents hanged, accused of sympathizing with the North. Sansa sat beside him at court, a silent, pale ghost. She no longer cried, she no longer spoke. Her eyes, when they met the Northern scouts' reports, were hollow. Arya had not been found. Some said she had escaped. Others claimed she'd been caught and killed. Ned didn't know what to believe anymore. The gods had gone silent, and the city reeked of despair. The night before the assault, Ned met with Robb and Catelyn in a cold tent. He'll use wildfire, Ned warned. He'll burn his own people before surrendering. Then we make him surrender before he gets the chance, Robb said coldly. One clean strike, no waiting. Catelyn looked between them. You're both wrong. This isn't war anymore, it's a funeral. For Jaime, for who we used to be. Number one disagreed at dawn. The North moved. Siege towers, rams, and ladders struck the city's defenses. Arrows rained like black snow. Grey wind leaped through the chaos like death itself, tearing down Lannister men like paper. Robb led from the front, his sword dripping red, his eyes burning like fire. But Joffrey had prepared. As soon as the gates weakened, the wildfire was released. Green flame burst through the city like a dragon's wrath. Streets exploded. Soldiers burned alive. Screams filled the air high, sharp, endless. The smell of roasted flesh clung to the wind. Ned watched it all from the ridge, frozen in horror. He had seen battle, death, and betrayal, but nothing like this. This was not war. This was the end of everything. Sansa was nowhere to be seen. Reports said she had fled the Red Keep just before the fire. Some said the Hound helped her. Others claimed she leaped into the Blackwater, her fate unknown. Robb fought through it all. He and his bannermen breached the gates at last, charging into the heart of the Inferno. And in the throne room they found Joffrey. He was laughing. The boy king sat on the Iron Throne, surrounded by burned corpses, his crown crooked, his face smeared with soot and blood. I win, he whispered. Jaime's death was paid in fire. Robb didn't wait. He drove his sword through Joffrey's chest without a word. No trial, no justice, just an end. When the fires finally died down, the city was silent. Not victorious, just empty, like a grave too large to ever fill. The smoke clung to the ruins of King's Landing like a curse. Streets were lined with charred corpses, and the once proud spires of the Red Keep now stood crooked, some reduced to ash. The city had been taken, but at what cost? It felt more like a victory for death than for the North. Ned walked through the carnage with heavy steps. His sword hung low, his shoulders lower. Around him, Northern soldiers picked through rubble, searching for the wounded or the dead. Some looted out of hunger, some just stood staring, as if unsure they were still alive. Robb sat in the small council chamber, what was left of it. His face was stone, his hands blood-stained. Joffrey's dead, he said without emotion. Cersei and her other children fled. No one knows where. The war is over, Ned muttered. Robb looked at him. No, it's only sleeping. Back in River Run, the ravens had already begun their grim work. Messages of victory flew north, but they carried more grief than triumph. Maester Lewin wrote back that Winterfell was safe, but uneasy. The north bled from within. Too many fathers dead, too many sons buried. Catelyn stood alone on the Blackwater Bay shoreline days later, where they found a body washed up. It was a girl, young, dark-haired, wearing a dirty tunic. Her face was swollen from the water, but Catelyn knew in her bones it was Arya. The sea had taken her gently where war had not. She didn't scream. She just knelt beside her, brushing her hair away, whispering a lullaby from a time before swords, before Jaime, before all the blood. Ned came to her but said nothing. He couldn't. The guilt was a noose tightening round his neck. He had brought honor to war, but honor hadn't saved his daughters. It hadn't spared the Riverlands. It hadn't stopped wildfire. That night, as he sat alone with ice by his side, Ned finally understood the cruel truth. There was no justice in Westeros, only power, and once they had killed Jaime Lannister, they had declared themselves wolves, ready to slaughter, and the lions had responded in kind. Robb was crowned king in the north. Days later, in the charred remains of the great sept, lords bowed. But their eyes were tired. Their faith had died with the thousands buried in green flame. As the ceremony ended, Ned took one final walk through the throne room. The Iron Throne stood empty, blackened, twisted. No one dared sit on it. Not Robb, not even the victors. It was cursed. He turned away from it, stepping over ashes, broken steel and bones. And behind him, the Red Keep groaned under the weight of its own sins. The North had won, but Westeros had lost something deeper, something it might never get back. All because, once upon a time, a man named Eddard Stark let his wife kill the Kingslayer, and nothing had been the same since.